welcome everybody to this afternoon's summer sessions with the Tutors Association. We have Rosie Ingold from Bright Heart Education joining us this afternoon, and she's going to be telling us all about EHCPs, which I know absolutely nothing about, so I'm really excited to learn about it. Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you all very much for coming along to this session. The reason why I decided to focus on EHCPs, education, health and care plans, was largely because it's something that I'm continuing to learn more about in my role at Bright Heart, and it's something that can be quite confusing. So I thought, as a former teacher, one of the best ways to really learn something is to teach it, to talk about it. So hopefully this will help some of you who are less familiar with EHCPs to get a better understanding of a process that can be quite complex and confusing. I'd like to say at the start that I've put this presentation together with a lot of help from my colleague Jenny Donovan, who is our client manager at Bright Heart. She's actually on leave at the moment, which is why she's not here. But she's an absolute expert on EHCPs and has given me lots of insights into the EHCP process and some of the challenges within that process as well. So I assume that the reason why you're at this presentation is because you'd like to learn more about EHCPs. But as we go through, if anyone has any insights, wants to add anything, has any information that perhaps I've missed out, then please do let me know. And of course, we'll have questions as well at the end. So in terms of how it's going to work in the presentation, I'm going to briefly talk through what EHCPs are. I'm going to discuss how they can be used to inform best practice for tutors. I'm going to give you an example from one of our EOTAS provisions of how an EHCP has been really used very carefully by the tutor, and the tutor's actually contributed to the development of that EHCP over time. I'm going to go through some of the challenges that parents face when going through the EHCP process and how tutors can support with that, and then any questions and feedback. So umbrella view, an EHCP, an education, health and care plan, is for children and young people aged up to 25 who need more support than is available through the special educational needs support that they're having in their current placement. So the EHCPs replaced what were formerly called statements of need. And really some of the key, well, really one of the key changes from statements is that it pushed the age up to 25. So it goes beyond school leaving age and really aims to provide more holistic support. So it's not just looking at special educational needs in terms of educational outcomes, but it's also looking at care and social outcomes as well. So they're positive in the sense that they do provide that more holistic oversight into a person's needs. But there are some challenges involved with that as well, which I'll touch on later. Before I joined Bright Heart, I was a teacher for nearly 6 years and worked in a number of different schools, state and private, selective schools and non-selective schools. And in all of the schools that I worked in, I never once saw an EHCP, despite the fact that I taught a number of students who had special educational needs, and including some students with really quite complex needs. And looking back, they must have had EHCPs, but I never had sight of them. And I therefore assume that's reasonably common. I was a secondary school teacher. I don't know if that's less common in the primary sector. But I think there are some challenges in terms of how much information from EHCPs gets disseminated out to teaching staff. And I wish I'd known more about this when I was a teacher to ask some more questions. So in terms of the EHCP process, at Bright Heart, we get asked very frequently for advice on this from parents. Essentially, an EHCP can be requested usually by parents, It can actually be by a student if they're over 16, or a teacher, and it's requested via the local authority. The local authority has this 6-week window to decide whether a needs assessment is necessary. So as you'll see as I talk through this, there are a number of stages to this process. All of those stages are quite lengthy, and that can understandably cause some distress, frustration for families who are going through this process. But this first stage is the local authority deciding whether or not a needs assessment is going to be necessary. And there has to be evidence that despite the child or the young person's current educational setting having taken some relevant steps to meet their needs, they're not making their expected progress. So it's really providing that evidence that regardless of what the school or the alternative provision is trying to provide, that is not providing enough, and it's not able to meet the needs. So if the local authority decides to proceed with a needs assessment, an education, health and care coordinator at the local authority will be appointed to gather evidence. Now, this really should be a multi-agency approach. So the best and most comprehensive EHCPs that give the best insight into a student's needs and requirements have a wide range of stakeholder input. So, I mean, baseline should be reports from the current school or the current education provider. Given that the EHCP includes information about health and care, doctors' assessments, there could be EdSpsych reports, speech and language reports, CAMS reports where possible, anything to do with social care, and crucially the parent's view of the child's needs. Ideally, and if age appropriate, the students' views on their own needs should also be included in the EHCP. And as much as possible, the student should have a sense of ownership over that EHCP. But where that's not appropriate, where that's not possible, or where age is a barrier, then the parents can add their views as well. So I've seen a lot of EHCPs through my current role. And as I said, the best of them have all of these evidence from all of these stakeholders. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. I have seen an EHCP where the entirety of the EHCP was copied and pasted from an EdSpsych report, and there was no changes made. So it's important when tutors are having a look at their students' EHCPs that they have an understanding of who's contributed to this document. And if tutors are working through a company, then speaking to whoever their contact is at the company to ask some questions about who's actually been involved in writing this EHCP, so you can get a sense and an understanding of who's contributed and what their particular specialism is. So on to the next quite extended part of the process. Once all of this evidence has been gathered, then a draft EHCP should be issued within 14 weeks, which then allows 15 days for a parent or a carer to study the draft. And they also have the option to request that a school or a specific education provider be named in the EHCP to provide the extra support that's needed. So, for example, Bright Heart Education has been named by parents and by local authorities as the named provider in an EHCP. The really crucial thing to remember about an EHCP is it's a legal document. So whatever goes into an EHCP, and certainly in terms of outcomes, which we'll come on to discuss in a moment, they are it's legally binding. So the local authority has to provide, has to fund the provisions that are laid out in the EHCP. And that can also be a challenge when the evidence that's been gathered and the information that's been provided in terms of needs and outcomes doesn't reflect that multi-agency approach that I mentioned before. So, as I said, the best EHCPs and the ones that provide the best springboard for students to make progress are ones that have multiple stakeholders involved. And as you can see from this slide, to reiterate what I said earlier, it is a really lengthy process. And sometimes what a tutor will find if they're supporting a student whilst the EHCP process is ongoing is that there can be real frustration, anxiety and upset about the length of time that it's taking to get the EHCP issued. It seems to be a nationwide issue in terms of the length of time that it takes. But yeah, it's not uncommon for it to take the maximum amount of time for the EHCPs to be issued. So a couple of points on the application process. In terms of kind of ease of the process, the easiest EHCPs to gather evidence for tend to be those that are led by a school. So as I mentioned earlier, parents, students over the age of 16 or a teacher can request that a local authority carries out a needs assessment for a student. When it's led by the school, it's easier in the sense that the school has access to all of the students' reports from all of their subject areas and from pastoral care as well. And it's also in the school's interest to provide the evidence so that they can access that additional funding that student needs. Another point to note is that more parents are choosing to pay for private educational psychologist reports, EdSpsych reports, and local authorities are now more willing to accept them. So many of you might know from personal experience that the waiting times for getting educational psychologist reports are very long if you're going through public funding. So lots more parents are choosing to pay for them privately. Local authorities used to be less willing to accept EdSpsych reports that came from privately funded sources, but purely because of the delays in the process and the difficulty in getting those reports through the local authority, they are more willing now to accept them. And another point, which I'll evidence in a later slide about EHCPs, is something that a lot of tutors comment on, and something that I've noticed with our students, is that you sometimes read through an EHCP and there's not a diagnosis of a particular SEN, and that's particularly the case with autism. So there's evidence of in some areas 3-year wait for autism diagnoses. So often, to speed up the process and to get the EHCP into place, what you'll see in the EHCP is mention of particular traits that are commonly associated with students with autism, and those are often couched within the context of social, emotional and mental health. So it's often basically cheaper and quicker to identify SEMH challenges than it is to wait for official SEN diagnoses. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment. And also post-COVID, there is an increasing amount of SEMH evidence being included in EHCPs as well. And again, I'll show you an example shortly of a student that we work with, anonymised, where the SEMH challenges sit alongside the SEN challenges. I'm assuming I'll be able to share these slides with everyone afterwards, so I apologise. This is quite small. Don't expect you all to be able to see it in particular detail, but this basically gives the time flow of how the EHCP process works. And just by casting a brief eye over it, you'll be able to see, as I've mentioned, it is a pretty lengthy process. There are consultations at every stage, and again, ideally, all of the stakeholders should be involved in those consultation processes. That doesn't always happen, but it is a lengthy process for any student to go through. So the next slide is going to have the key points highlighted. Don't worry, we're not going to go through all of this, but this is the overview structure of an EHCP. Now, for some reason, which I am yet to get a clear answer from anybody on, for some reason, there is no universal EHCP kind of framework. So EHCPs at different local authorities are laid out differently. They all include all of these sections from A to K, but they're all laid out differently, which can be really confusing when you're working with multiple local authorities and you've got EHCPs for different students. And sometimes they're not in the order you would expect. So I remember when I first read an EHCP from a local authority that we work with, I really struggled to find section F. It wasn't after section E or before section G, which is where I would expect it to be. It was kind of somewhere further down in the document. So it can take a while to get your heads around how different local authorities structure EHCPs. It would, of course, be great if there was just one EHCP format that was used by all local authorities, but that's not the case. So really what we're interested in from a tuition point of view with EHCPs are these three sections here. So section B, which is the individual's special educational needs. Section E, which is the outcomes that are desired from the EHCP and from this additional support. And section F, which is the provisions that are going to be made to meet that student's needs. And you can see that the other sections relate to the other elements of the EHCPs. There's health, social care, and also the information about sort of payment and who's going to be involved. But these are really the key elements. If you are a tutor, B, E, and F are the sections that you want to be looking at and highlighting because they're going to be specifically relevant to you. The other areas are important, and it is important to read the whole document. Particularly section A, because it gives you a really good oversight of the background of the student. Again, when it's been done really well, you'll get lots of information. Sometimes it can be a bit sparse. But section A is useful for giving you that background information on your student and how they've got to the point that they're at when they're meeting you. But B, E, and F are your key areas. So to go through these, section B, as any good legal document it has multiple subsections, which I won't go through in a huge amount of detail here. But really, the key thing is that even though it's subdivided into these sections, there's lots and lots of crossover between all of these different sections. So the summary of needs, where there's been a diagnosis, for example, say of dyslexia or ADHD, there'll be information about that in the summary of needs. A bit of background where possible about where the student's up to academically, the progress they've been making, and then going through their specific needs. And when I mentioned earlier about the SEMH needs often being used kind of in place of a diagnosis, even where there's strong belief that a diagnosis should be in place, that's where those SEMH needs are sometimes slotted in. So often into, for example, sensory or physical needs, even if there's not a specific diagnosis of autism, there will be information in there about traits or challenges that are linked to autism, and that will be included in sensory needs, for example. So, finds it very difficult to work with lots of background noise, or has a strong aversion to bright lights, things like that. So section E, this really focuses on the outcomes. So what we want the students to be able to achieve as a result of this additional support. So in terms of you as a tutor, what you're really going to be focusing on is the first point, the education and employment outcomes. But as we all know from working with young people, you don't have education and employment outcomes in a vacuum. And that is one of the benefits of the EHCP approach, as opposed to the statement of needs in the past, is that it does bring in those other factors as well. So looking at things like health and well-being. There has to be a timeline associated with these outcomes. And again, sometimes this isn't included in an EHCP, but it really should be. For those of you that have worked in schools before and written reports and done planning, there always has to be a point at which these outcomes are going to be assessed and progress is going to be tracked, whether that's through formative or summative assessments. As I said, sometimes this isn't included on the EHCP, but it really should be. And if it's not included, it's important for tutors to have a conversation with parents and carers where appropriate, to talk through those timelines, and if possible, with if the education is still being supported in a school or an alternative provision, to have that discussion with staff in that setting to understand when are we going to assess this, because there's no point just having an open-ended outcome without any way of actually tangibly measuring it. And then finally, section F. So this is the special educational provision, really the steps that need to be taken to ensure that the needs outlined in section B are met. And this has to include who's going to deliver this. So for example, Bright Heart Education is often named on EHCPs, and one of our specialist tutors will be delivering the provision. What's going to be delivered, how, when, and how often, and where will it be delivered? So really getting into the specifics of how these outcomes are going to be ensured. So this is an overview of the start of sections B, E, and F. This is a publicly available example of an EHCP provided by the London Borough of Enfield. It's available via their council website. And this one's quite helpfully laid out in that it has sections B, E, and F next to each other, which is useful. The least helpful ones are where it has it in order and you have to keep scrolling up and down to check the different sections. But this is a really helpful layout. But if you cast an eye over section B, you'll see what I mean about the sometimes lack of specific diagnosis of SEN. So it's saying that this child, Rayan, is self-directed and mostly on his own agenda, doesn't always appear to have understood the rules of the setting or have an awareness of behaviour expectations. The child has a limited range of interests and skills which can be repetitive or restrictive. So reading that from our professional standpoint, we would probably say that's interesting. Those are traits that are commonly associated with a student who has a diagnosis of autism, but there is no diagnosis included. Section E then talks about what they would like in terms of education and employment for this student, and helpfully a timescale is included there, so it's by the end of reception, and the focus is on functional play activities, and some examples are given, which is helpful of what this student should be able to demonstrate by the end of reception. And then section F has a little bit more detail. There's reasonable detail here, but there could be a lot more in terms of specific activities and approaches that would work well with the student. But certainly, reducing demand in the third point there, and giving an example of what not to say is helpful. Modelling play actions, and there's probably room here for this to be developed a little bit further. It's not clear, because this is just an example provided by Enfield. It's not clear how many stakeholders were involved in contributing to this EHCP. But as I said, it would be helpful for a tutor to have a little bit more guidance than, lower your demands and model activities. And in terms of who's going to provide it and how often, where and when, it's, as it says, delivered daily as part of a differentiated curriculum. So you've got a sense that this has to be happening every day. It's best when there is an actual structure within that. So the best EHCPs I've read actually break down each task and say there needs to be 30 minutes of this every day and an hour of this provision every day, because that helps the tutor and other providers to really understand how much time they should be spending on each section. So in terms of how EHCPs can be used to inform best practice for tutors, the EHCP document itself, these are two big caveats, when it's well written and put together with multi-agency input, and when it's up to date, can give tutors a really good insight into a student's needs that you wouldn't necessarily get from simply chatting to them or to their parents and carers. At Bright Heart, we always take a dual approach to EHCPs. So we'll receive them from the local authority, read them through in detail, but then we'll also, where possible, which fortunately usually is the case, we'll have a conversation with parents, carers, and ideally, if possible, with the student themselves to get, you know, a little bit more detail, perhaps on areas of the EHCP that aren't clear. And sometimes they are out of date as well. They're also really helpful for tutors in terms of providing background information, not only on the student, but also on their education thus far. So some of the challenges they may have faced, but also the areas where they have been making progress. And that helps you as a tutor to know where to kind of pitch your tuition as you start off. And again, in terms of well-written EHCPs, they can be really helpful in terms of enabling clear target setting for you as a tutor. So at Bright Heart, we use individual learning plans, and I'll show you an example of an anonymised one shortly. And our tutors are asked where there is an EHCP to align their tuition targets with the targets in the EHCP, so that there is direct evidence that that EHCP is being enacted. And it also provides a timeline for target setting as well. So thinking back to that previous slide, the example from Enfield, the target date is end of reception. So if a tutor is starting work with this student, say halfway through reception, they know they've got 4 months to be able to work towards these targets. So it can provide tutors with some useful clarity there in terms of timelines. So I'm going to come on now to an example in an EOTAS setting, so educated other than at school. We have a number of students at Bright Heart on EOTAS packages through the local authority. And this, I've anonymised this student and anonymised the tutor as well. But we were contacted by one of the home counties local authorities last summer to provide one-to-one support for Ben, who's 10 years old. So Ben does have a diagnosis of autism, ADHD, and a severe language disorder, and also has sensory processing difficulties. He had been in school, he'd been in a mainstream nursery school, and then had moved to an SEN school, but was really struggling to engage in the busyness of the classroom environment. And this was tied into some of his SEMH challenges as well. So very hypervigilant, very, very anxious, and also experiences depression, problems with peer relationships. And that was really inhibiting his ability to engage with his learning in a school environment. And what's been really helpful about Ben's EHCP is that it was a multi-agency approach. So we were able to look through information from the school where they'd contributed to the EHCP, and specifically they'd mentioned how his anxiety was a real barrier to him accessing the curriculum. So in terms of section B, so his SEN, we've got there the diagnoses of autism, ADHD, and language problems, and with the sensory processing as well. So they were laid out clearly in section B. And then sections E and F, really the key elements were that it has to be a tutor with QTS, with experience in supporting young learners with Ben's specific SEN. But not just the SEN, it had to be a tutor who had experience in supporting students with SEMH, specifically anxiety. There's also a requirement in Ben's EHCP for a TA to support with extracurricular activities. And there were very clear SMART outcomes, which I'll come on to in a minute, specified in Ben's EHCP. So I'm going to share, and hopefully this will work. Sam and I were having some problems earlier with sharing this. So let's see if I can. Right, example. And let's see if I can, I don't think I can make that full screen. So it might not be hugely clear, but I'll zoom in on it. So, as I said, at Bright Heart, we use individual learning plans for all of our students. I have anonymised the borough. It's not actually the London Borough of Brent. It's not actually the clients, although we do work with Brent. And I've also changed the student and the tutor's names. But the other information is pertinent. So what we ask our tutors to do is to carefully read through their students' EHCP, to have discussions with parents and obviously with their student as well, and to put together an individualised learning plan that supports the outcomes that are stated in the EHCP. So we provide our tutor with some background information on the student, and we gather that background information both from the EHCP section A and also from discussion with parents or carers or other guardians. And that gives the tutor some good insight, not only into the educational needs of the student, but also into them as a person. So Bright Heart's very focused on holistic provision. We're absolutely not sort of high pressure exam factory. We very much focus on SEN and SEMH. And it's really important, we know, that students trust and build a good relationship with the tutor that they're working with. And that relationship isn't just about academics, it's also about kind of mentorship side of the tuition relationship. So providing tutors with some insight into what the student enjoys, their hobbies and interests, can be a great way of building rapport, particularly in the first few sessions, and also informing activities that can take place. So Ben, for example, is really interested in monkeys, and he also loves playing games on his Nintendo Switch. So the tutor was able to incorporate that into his sessions. So we provide tutors with the basic information about additional needs, but they also read the EHCP to get more insight into that. And we also ask our tutors to discuss with parents and with the students what they feel the strengths and areas of improvement are. And more often than not, they're very much aligned with what's been outlined in section B of the students' EHCP. And again, it helps to provide an overview of the students' needs. And really, we particularly ask tutors to focus on those SEMH challenges, because often it's those challenges that are causing students to lack in confidence and lack in self-esteem, and therefore inhibit them making progress. So we have parents, students, and then the tutor's view. And then there's tutor's view of what Ben needs to focus on. And then we have our academic targets. So we ask our tutors to have SMART targets, which are strategic, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And they are linked to those outcomes in section E of the EHCP. And I have to say, this tutor is absolutely fantastic and writes very detailed reports and very detailed individual learning plans, which is wonderful. But you can see here, these are really specific targets. So Ben will be able to independently write at least one CVC word each session, improve his understanding of numbers up to 100, and then it's how he's going to demonstrate that. So completing activities with 80% accuracy on the objectives below. And then the tutor goes into the specifics of which objectives need to be met. So these are really good examples of SMART targets, very much linked in to the requirements in Ben's EHCP. We also ask tutors to include SEMH targets, again, drawing on the fact that the SEMH and the SEN often go hand in hand. So Ben will be able to complete at least 5 separate activities, each session lasting around 10 minutes. And that all ties into Ben's sometimes hyperactivity and struggling to focus. So it's really building on his ability to be calm and to regulate himself, and also tying into how that can aid with supporting him with his additional needs. So in the first session that the tutor has with the students, they will do a sort of initial assessment. Now, depending on the age and the level of the student, that could be a formal test. More often than not, it's through play activities, particularly with our younger students. And sometimes it's more through informal conversation, but to get an overview of where the student's at. and what kind of benchmark we're working from. So the tutor here provided some really detailed assessment here in terms of what Ben's able to achieve academically at the moment, but also some of his social emotional needs as well. And then we come through to outcomes and comments. So at Bright Heart, we ask our tutors to update their individual learning plans, usually every half term. That tends to coincide with the kind of assessment framework that students would be experiencing in school. That's flexible though, so sometimes that's not appropriate, it needs to be longer, sometimes it's shorter, but as a general rule, we go for every half term. And the tutors are asked to comment on academic targets and results of any assessments that have been carried out. And I won't go through all of Ben's because they're extremely detailed, but needless to say, this tutor has done a great job in terms of addressing targets and sort of marking the progress that Ben's been making. And very helpfully for me, when I'm reading this individual learning plan, he's also added updates in green, which is really helpful for me, so I can actually see what the updates are. And right at the end, and there's quite a lot of assessment here because it's fantastically detailed, right at the end of the individual learning plan, we would have a final assessment, not relevant in this case because Ben's provision is going to be continuing in the next academic year, but a little summary there of how well things have gone, and then we make a comment at the end. And these individual learning plans, I'll switch back now to the presentation. These individual learning plans, now how do I get this to go to full screen? I have to stop presenting and start presenting again. Sorry about this. That should come up in a second. See if everyone can see that. So where these individual learning plans are really helpful for the EHCP is that they are then used as evidence that the outcomes required from the EHCP are being met. So individual learning plans are shared with the local authority, with the EHC caseworkers, and they can also form an important part of developing the EHCP over time. And EHCPs are not designed to be a moment in time that never changes. They do have to go through a process of being updated and renewed on an annual basis. And again, that is a legal requirement. So at the top of every EHCP, there'll be the date that it was issued, and then there'll be the date for the next annual review, which should be in a year's time. And these individual learning plans are really crucial for helping to develop the EHCP in that annual review process. So some challenges and sort of tips at the end here. One of the key challenges of EHCPs is their timeliness. They can be really out of date. So often we'll be sent EHCPs at Bright Heart from local authorities for specific students, and the EHCP will have been written a number of years ago and hasn't been properly updated since then, which is why we always try to have a conversation with parents or carers where we can, just to get the most sort of up-to-date information about that student and where they're at. We would always encourage our tutors as well to, as they're building relationship with the student, with the students' parents or carers, to encourage them in annual reviews to update section A. So, for example, where it's talking about students' interests, their hobbies, what their aspirations are, it's important that that is updated on a yearly basis, because like anybody, your aspirations at the age of 17 are not the same as they were when you were 11. And it's important that students feel empowered, and the tutor can often be a helpful support in empowering them to add their own information to the EHCP. Also, EHCPs don't tell us the full story. Like any documents, they provide an overview, hopefully a detailed one, but it's not providing the full story of who this student is as a human being. and all of the multiple influences on their life and things that they've experienced. As I said earlier, the best EHCPs are multi-agency in terms of the stakeholders who are involved in providing evidence, but they are limited when there's only one or two professionals involved in contributing that information. As a tutor, I would thoroughly recommend really taking the time to read through a student's EHCP in detail, especially section B, understanding what those needs are, and to also be curious about the student's needs and ask questions of parents to get a deeper understanding, particularly if, like with that example from Enfield, there isn't a specific diagnosis listed in the EHCP. Feel confident to ask the parents where you're working directly with the family, so that you can get a better understanding of what their child's needs are. And it's also important to not rely solely on the EHCP and to not feel that that's the only information that you should be using to inform your practice. So asking parents what the best approaches are, what kind of breaks are needed. And that's kind of information that's often not included in the EHCP. How often are breaks needed? What kinds of behaviours can be predicted? And what are the warning signs of dysregulation? And those are the kind of questions that parents or carers, if the students in a different residential setting, are really well placed to be able to answer. And in terms of outcomes, and any of you who have been teachers, worked in a school in any capacity, will know that outcomes do need to be flexible in some regard. Tutors need to understand that many of the outcomes that are listed in the EHCP are beyond the reasonable reach of a student, but they're there to maximise the provision. So, for example, we'll often get through EHCPs which will say, that there needs to be 25 hours a week for this provision, but at the particular state or stage that student is at, we're looking at a maximum of 10 hours a week, because the student wouldn't be able to cope with 25 hours a week at this stage. But 25 hours a week has been funded in order to maximise what the student can access. But we have found time and time again that the best approach is to start small and build up gradually over time, allowing the student and the tutor to build their relationship and to make sure that the student doesn't feel overwhelmed. I'll open up to questions in a moment, but if you would like to find out more information, particularly about the EHCP process, we have a blog on our website, brightheart.co.uk, and then /all-about-EHCPs. And that gives a lot more information into the process, which is particularly handy if, as a tutor, you're working directly with the family and they're maybe at the early stages of applying for an EHCP and don't really understand the process or need some answers. Please do point them towards that blog post, because it goes through the entire process in a lot of detail. And my colleague Jenny Donovan is also very happy to chat through the EHCP process with parents too. But at this point, it would be great to open up to any questions that anybody may have. I don't know if I'm fielding the questions or anybody else is, but I'm open to whatever.
Hi Rosie, it's Julius here from
Hi.
TTA. I've taken over from Sam, so just so you know I'm here.
No
yeah,
worries.
I'm happy to raise or to chair the questions if you wanted to, or if you wanted to just see if anyone has any. I'm happy for you to do that as well, whichever works best for you.
I mean, if you want to sort of choose which questions to take in what order, that's no problem.
Great. Well, we've got a couple of hands up. So I think Amy put a hand up first. So Amy Rusby, do you have a question for Rosie?
Hi. Yes.
Hi.
Hi. When you were saying about the school or the setting should be named in the EHC plan, does that include if the provision is going to be for sort of additional tutoring from a private tutor? Does that include naming where that's going to be sourced from at that point, and if so, can that change? Because sometimes, obviously, parents' choice, it may be that that tutor is no longer available and they then need to select another one, or does that throw a spanner in the works, or is it kind of incorporated?
That's a really good question. Yes, it can be changed. So generally what would happen is it would be the name of a provision, or like a provider, rather than a specifically named tutor. So for example, Bright Heart Education would be named as the provider, and then it's up to us to source the tutor who's going to be the best fit for that student. And as we all know, that can change, people's scheduling changes or whatever. And therefore it does leave that room for changes to be made. But parents can request that the provision name is changed as well. And that's what the annual review process is supposed to address as well, is this current provision suitable? Is it providing the outcomes that we're looking for? And if it's not, then it's in the best interest of the student for that to be changed.
And does that have to wait until that annual review to be sort of, can it be sort of like dealt with earlier if it's appropriate, kind of thing?
So parents can request that there are reviews done in between annual reviews. So they can request that. You can sort of raise, sort of emergency requests for reviews, but those are obviously done kind of in order of how urgent the need is. But generally speaking, it's done on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you.
No worries, thank you. Oh, you're on mute, Julius.
That would help. Thanks. And yeah, we also have a question from Victoria as well.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering if tutors can contribute to an EHCP.
Yeah, so thank you for that. Yes, tutors can, and in fact are often some of the best placed professionals to contribute to an EHCP. They usually wouldn't be involved in the initial putting together of the EHCP because EHCPs are often suggesting alternative provision through tuition. So the tutor's usually stepping in once the EHCP is in place. But certainly where the tutor's really important is at the annual review process. So when we have annual reviews that we attend for our students, as much as possible, we have the tutors there as well, and they contribute to the updates to the EHCP.
Right, got it. Okay, thank you.
Great. And we've also got a question in the chat as well from Adebasola. I'm not sure if this was asked before, but can tutoring hours be added and allocated to the EHCP?
Yes, so they in the section F, where it's talking about the who, what, when, where, why elements, specific hours can be listed for tuition. It's often a little bit more generalized than saying it has to be this number of hours specifically for tuition. It would usually be more in the context of there needs to be half an hour a day of a literacy program that is going to focus on phonics, and then it would be the role of the in our case tuition company to select a tutor that has that particular skill set. You can see even if the child is still in school. Yes, so if the child's in school, sometimes what happens is that the funding that a student is allocated through the EHCP, that's often used by the school, for example, to employ a one-to-one TA for that particular student. More of what I've been talking about today is when the student's out of school, for example, the example of Ben I gave where he's in EOTAS and his entire education is done through tuition. I think there was another question that came up there, but it's disappeared from my screen. Julius, would you mind reading it out?
Of course, yes, it's from Lauren. She was asking, we're an alternative provision stating a small, oh no, sorry, mine's gone as well. Let me just scroll up. We're an alternative provision offering EOTAS tutoring. We're being asked to hold an EHCP review for a student. How do we go about this? Is it in our remit or should it be the EHCP caseworker? So
it should be the EHCP caseworker. So the local authority hosts the review, and then Lauren, you as the alternative provision, you would attend that annual review with as many people as possible who are involved in that EOTAS provision. But it is the responsibility of the local authority to host the reviews.
Great. We've got quite a long question here. I don't know if you wanted to read it, Rosie? Or...
Yeah, I'll read it out. So it says, this is a question regarding what you just said about EHCP targets not being fully achievable for the student. You gave the example about 25 hours provision and realistically the student only being able to access 10 hours. You spoke about the best approach being starting small and building up gradually over time. For example, do you mean stating a small amount on the EHCP initially and then building up and writing a large amount of hours on the EHCP? For example, do you mean, oh, right, I see that's been replicated. And how does the SENCO account for the remaining hours that are unused? Got it. So what would happen is that the maximum number of hours that have been approved by the local authority would be included in the EHCP, because the number of hours is then tied to the funding. So it's better to put in more hours at the start and then build up to using them, rather than putting in fewer hours and then having to go back and revise the EHCP. And in terms of how does the SENCO account for the remaining hours that are unused? So again, this is about having an open conversation with everybody involved about what's in the best interests of the student. It might be that those hours could be used for a different type of intervention, not just for tuition. So for example, with Ben's EHCP, he had some spare hours that weren't being used for tuition, and those have then been used to employ a TA, again through Bright Heart, who takes him to forest school sessions in the afternoon. And that ties into some of the SEMH challenges that are laid out in Ben's EHCP in terms of improving his self-confidence, his ability to interact with other children, and his ability to interact with other adults. And generally speaking, we find that local authorities are open to suggestions of how those hours can be best allocated, as long as what's being suggested ties into what's outlined in the EHCP in terms of needs. Generally speaking, caseworkers are open to professional suggestions of what would be best for that student.
Great. There's also two other questions in the messages, and Amy's got her hand up. So we'll go to the ones in the messages quickly now. So Rebecca's asking, can the parents request a specific tutor on the EHCP for funded tutoring hours, or does the school choose? And can the school say no to funding being allocated for tutoring if the school do not provide any one-to-one TA support hours?
So parents, I'm trying to work out how to answer this in the clearest way possible. So the parents can request a tuition provider and then have the conversation with the tuition provider about which tutor they want. We've actually had some instances where a family's been paying privately for a particular tutor and then has wanted that tutor to be the tutor that continues with the local authority funding for the EHCP. And that tutor has then come on board with us because the local authorities named us as the provider. And so it makes no difference to the student. They just carry on with the same tutor, but that tutor is then working through us. And as far as I'm aware, local authorities will use companies, agencies, because they know that they're then compliant with safeguarding, safe recruitment, all of that kind of stuff. I'm not aware, and I may be wrong, but I'm not aware of local authorities approving purely private tutors. I think it would have to be through a company. In terms of can the school say no to the funding being allocated for tutoring, I don't think they can. Because the reason why the child's getting the EHCP is because, for example, the school isn't able to meet all of the child's needs. So if that has been identified as an issue, then the local authority is allowed to request tuition. In addition, sometimes that tuition happens within schools. We have tutors that go into schools. A child comes off timetable for some sessions of the day, and the tutor then works closely with the school.
Perfect. Thanks, Rosie. Anna has also got a question in the chat box. How much of an EHCP is funded by a school if they're named as the educational provider? Is this a reason why they may not be keen to submit EHCPs on behalf of children?
So the local authority is responsible for the funding here. So schools generally, they're if they're leading this EHCP process, then it's often because they don't have within their current budget, you know, what they need to support this particular child. But the provision for the EHCP is the legal responsibility of the local authority.
Great. And Amy's got her hand up as well. Did you want to ask your question, Amy?
Yeah, hi, sorry, one more question.
Yeah, no worries.
You kind of touched on it, I think, when you said about the TA taking Ben out for the forestry afternoon, but can it, I'm assuming it would be kind of a mixture of the educational, well, I mean, it could be a mixture of any of the needs, to be honest, but I mean, it might be sort of, you know, more of the social side as well, but can enrichment be funded for and provided for by an EHCP as well as kind of education alongside it? Because I know that, you know, some schools obviously offer enrichment, but again, if they can't offer it in a way that is accessible to that child or particularly appropriate for that child, then they're going to miss out on that part as well. So that's kind of why I'm asking if it can run alongside.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the great things about the EHCP in comparison to the old statements of need, is that it is much more holistic. It's looking at health and social care as well. So, I mean, in our experience, if there's a particular activity, something like enrichment, that a tutor or a parent feels would be beneficial for the student, we have a conversation with the local authority about whether they will approve it. And if it's in line with the overall outcomes in the EHCP, then it gets approved. So we have students who, for example, have singing therapy and art therapy, as I mentioned before, forest schools. If it's something that's in a school curriculum, then there's not really any argument against it, because all of the students, regardless of whether they're in, you know, a mainstream school setting, alternative provision, whatever it is, they are entitled to access the same curriculum that any student would be accessing. So if there's enrichment on school curriculums, then the student should be accessing that too. And the same goes for, you know, relationship and sex education, for example, that they're still entitled to receive all of that, even if they're on an EOTAS program, for example.
And does this apply presumably to children who are at an independent school as well as a state school?
Yes. So regardless of what the setting is, the students are entitled to the same curriculum access as they would be in any other setting.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, you're on mute, Julius. I'm not sure how much time we have.
Yes, I was sorry about that. I keep going to mute. I was just saying we are running slightly over. I'm not sure if Rosie, if you have to go on to another meeting or anything.
No, I can answer.
Okay, cool. We've got 2 or 3 more questions, so we'll go through them quickly. Where was the next one?
Oh, there's the online maths one about tutors.
Yes.
The previous question, tutors cannot give their views as part of the EHCP application, only post-assessment. So they certainly can give their views as part of the EHCP application if they're involved with the student at that point. But generally speaking, tutors tend to become involved once an EHCP is already in place. The local authorities got in touch with, for example, us, and we then provide the tutor. But certainly if a tutor is already working with a family when they start the EHCP application, then absolutely they should be involved, and their lesson reports and their individual learning plans should be contributed as evidence.
And Adipasola has a question there.
If a child is already placed in a special needs school, can they still have tutoring in their EHCP? Yes, if that special needs school is not able to provide all of the education, all of the support that child needs, then they can still access additional tuition, definitely. And then can I rephrase my question? Why might a school not be willing to put forward an EHCP on behalf of a child and thereby leaving no option but a parent to do the applications as? So in terms of what I've experienced with that tends to be when there's disagreement between the school and the parent as to whether or not needs are being met. So if the school is saying the needs are being met and we are able to meet the child's needs, and the parent's saying, I don't think you are, and has some evidence that they feel that those needs are not being met. So it's usually when there's some sort of disagreement between the school and the parent as to whether needs are being met.
Perfect. I think Amy's got one last question, I think.
Yeah, hi. Just going with what you just said there. Is there like a time frame for? I know you were saying about the time frame for response in terms of getting the EHCP sorted out, but is there a sort of time frame in terms of the actual intervention as it's running?
So in terms of the, let me just get back up to the first slide. In terms of the amount of time that to gather all of the evidence.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the start. So they've got 14 weeks. The local authority has 14 weeks to provide a draft. So that's the initial period of time that they have to pull together all of the evidence and then put that into the EHCP, which is quite a long time and can feel like a very long time for families when they're waiting.
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. I think that is all the questions for today. If you do have any further questions for Rosie, feel free to either email myself and I'll pass them over to Rosie, or did you want to put your email in the chat?
I will put my email in the chat. That is no problem.
Great.
Nice straightforward email address. There we go.
Great, and thanks so much for everyone for attending, and especially for the questions as well. And a big thank you to Rosie. Really interesting, and I'm sure there'll be lots of people viewing it back on YouTube as well. So if you haven't seen any of our other YouTube summer sessions, they should all be on there now as well. And we have 1 week left to run of other sessions until next Thursday. So please do check out the schedule and sign up to any you're interested in. And once again, thank you very much, Rosie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And everyone have a lovely day.